Chapter 27 of Red Kayak. Digger stood up and jammed his hands in his pockets, then quickly pulled them out and dropped them at his side. But I could see his fingers curl up into nervous fists. His public defender stood beside him, lifted a legal pad full of notes, and cleared his throat. Your Honor, Michael Griswold has lived his entire life on the eastern shore of Maryland. He is one of 5 children in his family. True, I thought, he was one of 5, even though his 2 older brothers had already left home. A fair student, Michael is nevertheless a very hard worker, the lawyer continued, often helping his father, a heavy equipment operator, to haul loads of gravel and sand. His mother says he is invaluable at home, too, often taking care of his younger brother and sister, including feeding and putting them to bed when both his parents have to work. He glanced at his notes, and I hoped that he would tell everybody in court to look at Digger's chipped tooth, the one in front that never got fixed after he broke it, throwing himself on the ice to save my life. Give him some credit for that, I wished I could holler. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Digger. Michael has never been in trouble with the law before, the lawyer went on, but his father has had numerous contacts with police. I won't go into detail here, but several complaints have been made against Mr. Griswold for assaulting his wife, often with the children present. Just last month, a restraining order was issued, limiting Mr. Griswold's contact with the family. My eyes shifted to Digger's dad and tried to burn a hole through the back of his thick, bald head, but he sat there like a rock. I wondered if that public defender was going to tell everyone how Mr. Griswold smacked Digger in the eye, too, the night before our Valentine dance at middle school. None of this is any excuse for what happened to Benjamin DeAngelo, the young public defender continued. But I want the court to know that Michael has harbored a lot of resentment and anger toward his father and has never had a healthy escape valve. Never any counseling of any kind. Never anyone to talk to or go to for help, except for his grandfather, who recently has become frail and was placed in a nursing home. At the mention of his grandfather, Digger crossed and then uncrossed his arms. I would like to add, the attorney said, that it was Mr. DeAngelo who purchased the farm belonging to Michael's grandfather, tearing down the old farmhouse before building a new home there. And while we realize this is no excuse for the terrible loss of life that has resulted, we nevertheless ask the court to keep all this in mind. Truly, it was a practical joke gone bad. The public defender stood back and indicated Digger's mom. Mrs. Sue Lorraine Griswold would now like to address the court. Mrs. Griswold, her stringy, gray-streaked hair falling halfway down her back, stood up and tugged a snug blouse over her wide hips. I have always liked Digger's mom. She had a rough life, I know, but she loved telling jokes and teasing the kids when I was around. Sometimes she laughed so hard her eyes would tear up, and I admired her toughness. Maybe she wasn't tough enough to whip Mr. Griswold, but she could drive a dump truck and operate a bulldozer as good as any man. I know I have to keep it short, Digger's mom started, but I want to tell you, my son here is a good boy in his heart. He has always obeyed his parents, and he means the world to Hank and Leanne, his little brother and sister. It's true, he does get a fiery temper at times. Runs in the family, I guess. Anyways, I can promise you this, that if, when my boy comes home, we will, the children and I, have moved permanent to my sister's, over in Denton. She's got a pretty big house on Peelicker Road, and Digger, that's Michael, Your Honor, he'd go to school there in Kent County, 'cause I want to give him a fresh start." She hung her head for a second and then said, "That's all. I thank you very much for your time, Your Honor." While she sat down, I watched Mr. Griswold, but he didn't move or even look at his wife. After that, both JT and Digger had a chance to speak for themselves. JT was first in a voice just loud enough for us to hear. "I am really sorry for what happened to Ben and his family. I wrote the D'Angelos a letter. I told them that if I could turn back time, I wouldn't have been there, down at their dock that day. Honestly, we never meant to hurt Ben or his family, but I know that because of what we did, we hurt them and a lot of other people. I am truly sorry. I know that I will answer to the Lord for this. It is something I will always carry with me." When JT sat down, his lawyer touched him on the shoulder. Digger scraped back his chair and stood. "I want to say I'm sorry, too," he began. "I've had a lot of time to think about what we done. And I want Your Honor to know that I'm the only one here who should be blamed. Like my mom said, I get a fiery temper sometimes, and I was pretty angry at Mr. D'Angelo for ripping down my grandpa's house and moving in there, taking away all those things in my life that I love so much. I know now it wasn't Mr. D'Angelo's fault. I was just lashing out. The way my dad lashes out at me, I guess." Digger paused a moment. I wondered if he was going to go on. "Anyway, so I told JT," Digger continued, "that if he didn't come with me to steal the drill and that glue, that the next time Curtis tried to punch him out at school, I weren't going to be there to stop it." Suddenly, Digger was turning, his eyes scanning the courtroom until he saw me. "Also, I want everyone in here to know that my friend Brady Parks, he's sitting there in the back, that Brady should in no way get blamed or looked down on for what happened. I don't hold nothing against you, Brady, and I'm sorry I lied to you. We was best friends growing up, and, well, you were right about no one ever forgetting. That day in the field after school, you asked how I'd feel if it were Hank or Leanne in the kayak." I sat up tall and nodded so he could see I remembered. Digger wiped at one eye and turned to his mother. "I don't want nothing bad ever happened to those kids. Mom, I'm so sorry for all I done to mess things up." Mrs. Griswold started crying, and when Digger did, too, I couldn't watch any longer. My head bowed, I listened to him plead with Master Williams. "Please don't punish JT the same as me, Your Honor. I brung a lot of shame on him, but I'm the only one here in this room is to blame." When he finished and sat down, several minutes of silence followed. I felt as though my whole life was on hold right then. I kept looking back from the back of JT to the back of Digger, and smack out of the blue, an oxymoron came into my mind. Alone, together. That's what we were. Together in this room with all these people. I'd never felt more alone. All this time, Master Williams was busy writing in different folders on her desk. When she finished, she took off her glasses. "Please stand," the bailiff said quietly. JT and Digger stood. I knew this was the moment. I felt myself leaning forward, my hands gripping my knees, bracing myself for what she would decide. She started off slowly. "Mr. Tyler, Mr. Griswold, I appreciate your apologies and all of your heartfelt comments. I know that you have apologized, and I know that you have both said you didn't mean to kill anyone." She paused a second before continuing. "But I am afraid that in this case, apologies are not enough. From the corner of my eye, I saw Mom fold her hands in her lap. Dad leaned forward beside me. What you boys did is like firing a gun into a crowded movie theater just to scare everybody. Only someone got killed. Master Williams focused intently on my friends as she explained this. Mr. Griswold, you've admitted this was all your idea and that you threatened your friend, Mr. Tyler, compelling him into committing the act with you. She turned to JT. But Mr. Tyler, I don't see any evidence here of physical force. You're not a puppet. You could have said no. You could have walked away. But you didn't. And then you did nothing to stop Mr. Griswold. In fact, it is my understanding that you helped to steal that drill and the glue, and that you stood guard while Mr. Griswold destroyed property belonging to the D'Angelos, thereby setting the stage for the horrendous act that followed. Let this be a lesson to you, Mr. Tyler, she said, that just because you don't actively participate in a crime, you're not off the hook. No, you are both to blame for what happened to that little boy. JT's mom put a hand up to her mouth. This offense is so serious that there have to be consequences. Master Williams continued, her voice growing harsher. Look around you. Look at your mothers. Look at the pain you have caused your families, not to mention the pain and the enormous loss the D'Angelos have suffered. The most important thing you boys need to learn is that what you did was so reckless and so unthinking that a little boy lost his life. One little boy won't grow up and go to school or ever have a job or a family of his own because of what you did. She paused again. Now, that kind of behavior cannot and will not go unpunished in the state of Maryland. You need to know this. You need to know this for the rest of your life. When she finished, she leaned back, but continued staring at Digger and JT for a moment. Then she put her glasses back on and busily wrote on the papers in front of her. Both JT and Digger looked whipped and stood limply with their heads hanging. It killed me to watch, but I couldn't turn away either, not then. A couple minutes went by. Maybe it wasn't even that long. Then Master Williams spoke again. The words came fast. There was some legal jargon, but I grasped this. She committed JT and Digger to the custody of juvenile services, to 9 months in a forestry camp for juvenile offenders out in western Maryland. At the end of 9 months, I'll review your records, she warned. If I think you haven't learned anything, I will not hesitate to keep you both out there for another couple years. 9 months. Well, I was relieved, to tell the truth. 9 months was a whole lot better than hearing until you're 21. 9 months was the school year. By summer, I thought, they could both be home. They could be back in school for sophomore year, well, or freshman year if they had to repeat. It's not too bad, Mom said to me. No, I agreed. Everyone was talking in hushed voices, and I began to think that forestry camp had to be better than some juvenile jail place, too. They're lucky, Dad noted. Damn lucky, Carl added. But the next thing we knew, the 2 sheriff's deputies, who had stood quietly at the side of the room all morning, were putting handcuffs on my 2 friends. JT's mother wasn't even allowed to hug him goodbye. The deputy shook his head and gently pushed her arm away, even though she was reaching out and calling his name. Hey, wait, I started. Mom and Dad grabbed my elbows and rushed me out into the hallway then. They got me a drink from the water cooler, and I didn't realize until I took the cup that my hands were shaking.